I'm Sandy Addis. I'm chairman of the National Dropout Prevention Center. The National Dropout Prevention Center is pleased to partner with the South Carolina Department of Education to bring you this Learning Loss series. It's a series of 6 webinars that focus on different issues. The first 2 were on attendance. Now, the number 3 and number 4 are on student behavior, and number 5 and 6, which come up when schools start back, beginning August the 9th, 5 and 6 will be on student engagement. And all of these webinars are in the context of the pandemic shutdown. We had the pandemic, we had shutdowns, we had to resume. That was challenging in many ways. And now we've got challenges not just with academics, but in this case, today's topic, with student behavior in many cases. And so we want to learn what some districts are doing. We're real fortunate to have the 2 districts, Anderson 5 and Greenville County Schools, represented here today. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists from Anderson 5, Janet Mills. Janet is the principal of McLeese Elementary School. Janet, wave at us so we'll know which picture you are there. And then we've got Dr. Jerome Hudson. Dr. Hudson is the Assistant Superintendent for Student Services. And so with that, we'll begin our conversation. Dr. Hudson, I'll start with you at the district level. Tell us about Anderson 5. Who, in case we don't know, what are we?
Addis 5, we located in the upstate between where we border Pickens and Greenville County, I-85. We are the largest of the 5 districts in Anderson County. We have about 12,600 students in the district. We are considered the city district because we're located pretty much in the city of Anderson.
Okay. What about the economics and demographics of Anderson 5, Dr. Hudson?
It is certainly the most diverse of the 5 school districts. We have a population, it's 49% white or Caucasian, 30, I think it's 30-something percent African American. Let me check my notes to be sure. Yeah, 33% African American, Hispanic is 8% and 10% other. So really, it is a majority minority district because it's only 49% Caucasian.
Okay. Dr. Hudson, back in March of 2020, the pandemic came along. Tell us about Anderson 5, how you shut down, came back. Tell us about that.
Yeah, what we did, naturally, when the governor back in March of 2019 said that all the schools would have to close for the remainder of the year, we were fortunate because we had one-to-one computers already. So we were able to go virtual. We were one of those test districts with the state. So we were kind of ahead of the game in a lot of ways. So we sent the Chromebooks home, we sent assignments home with our students, and we finished the remainder of the year actually online. The next year, we had a virtual school with about 4,000 students, and parents had an option of coming back face-to-face or remaining virtually. So we had 4,000 students to remain virtually, which was actually the 2nd largest district, I guess, in the district, because our 4,000 students were larger than districts 2, 3, and 4. Mm-hmm. After that year, we came back to pretty much regular routines after that 2020 school year. 2021, we came back face-to-face with some COVID restrictions, of course. And this year, 2022-23, we're pretty much back to normal as much as possible. For example, yesterday I had questions about overnight field trips and field trips out of state, and I told them that we're doing exactly what we did pre-COVID.
Okay, good. Dr. Hudson, from the district level, particularly as you are responsible for student services, which of course a lot of that includes student behavior issues. Did you see anything different when school resumed?
Yeah, I did. Students who had been out for a long time seemed to have trouble adjusting back to school, Dr. Addis. They had some social concerns. We saw a lot more with mental health problems with these students, easily agitated. A lot of the students seemed angry. A lot of the parents were that way also. So it was certainly a learning curve again for these students because some of them had never been in school. This distance that they've been experiencing from home certainly was a learning curve for these students as well.
I see. Okay, great, great. Let's switch over to McLeese Elementary for a minute. Janet Mills, you're the principal of McLeese. Tell us about McLeese. You're a school with an excellent some excellent behavior data. So tell us about McLeese first. Tell us about the school. Introduce us.
All right. Well, McLeese is an elementary school. Now, this is the first year that I've had 4-year-olds. So we have 4-year-olds through 5th grade. Way out in the country. Dr. Hudson will tell you, beautiful campus, real rural, lots of farmland, real quiet. I have about 588. I borderline between 580 and 600 students most years. Today I had 587 before I left. I checked. Poverty level is about 72. I kind of border between 71 and 73-ish most years. This year I think we're right at 72. Just some other data from African American, we got 20%, Caucasian 59%. I do have 4 self-contained special needs classrooms with about 54 students total in my special needs population. We've got a good rating on the report card last year. Before COVID, we had an excellent rating. The 2 years I kind of went back and looked at some data before COVID, we were excellent those 2 years prior. Not real disappointed with my good. I'm three points away from excellent. So we're trying to get back to that status, but we were a good, strong good on the report card. Anything else that you want to know about us?
Well, what I'd like to hear is when you reopened school and you had some of your students virtual and then you were bringing students back in, what did you notice about the students, their behavior and related issues?
Right, and this could be different at middle and high school levels, but at the elementary level, we had to kind of remember that when we closed the school, the kindergartners had the option the next year to go virtual. So they could have spent their entire 1st grade year in virtual. So it was actually 2nd grade and 3rd grade before they actually came back to a normal type of classroom setting. So we saw some of the same types of behaviors that Dr. Hudson talked about, a lot of social problems because they had not really interacted with other students in the classroom. And when they had returned, you know, we were sitting 6 feet apart. So they hadn't had time in close guided reading centers or sitting, you know, on the rug side by side. So we saw students that were frustrated over academics. I think the school district offered an excellent virtual program, but a lot of the elementary students were at home with grandparents or with relatives because parents were working. So they were behind. There were some gaps academically. And when students come back and they're behind and they're not up with the peers and there's some social issues, we saw some frustration. We saw students having behavior problems with just shutting down, not wanting to do their work, not getting along with others. So we kind of had to figure out a plan to bring everyone back together, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Well, and specifically, tell us about some of the things both you did as school-wide and maybe some things you saw some of your teachers doing to try to overcome this gap that the students had experienced.
Well, with social skills and things, we did rely heavily on our guidance counselors. We've got excellent mental health counselors. The school psychologists work with the students. And for behavior issues, we realized when I talked, you know, with my admin team that, you know, suspending children was not going to be the answer because they'd already been home and they wanted to go home. You know, they would, if they got in trouble, they would say, you know, you would say, well, I'm gonna have to, you know, we don't want to have to call your parents. They wanted you to call them. They wanted to go back home to grandmama or to the relative or, you know, so we worked real hard to keep them in the building. I've got some teachers that volunteered to tutor. I've got a church down the road that's volunteered to start a program for us for tutoring. We brought positive incentives back. We made sure we worked back to our pre-COVID where we had school-wide goals. We have what's called the house system. I don't know if any other schools or anyone on has ever participated in that. It's kind of patterned after the Ron Clark Academy, to where everyone in the building is in a certain house, and each house is based on a character trait. For instance, I'm in the blue house, and the blue house is courage. You may be in the red house, and that's honesty. So we're constantly focusing on character education, the social emotional part of coming to school. We started back this year finally with school-wide celebrations so that all of the children can be in the same room together. We hadn't been in an assembly, in 3 years because we had the social distance. So now we can have assemblies, and like Dr. Hudson said, we've got field trips coming back. We've had school-wide goals, and we try to do 3 major goals, and we call them our WIGs, which is a wildly important goal, WIG. And one goal is always based on academics, and that will be like meeting your MAP score, something like that. One goal is on behavior. We're trying to not have as many referrals as we have the previous year. So we track referrals on this huge chart at the back of the school so they can see, oh, we're doing really well. We're not close to last year's goal, yet we're trying to beat that. And then we have a culture goal, which would be the house system. So we try to have all the celebrations. So I think what we mainly found out is to focus on the positives, to try to keep the kids in the building, working with them on the behavior issues with, the professionals that can help us, working with teachers, because we were talking the other day with Dr. Hudson when we were, talking about today. And, I said, what some people may not realize is that we have teachers that haven't taught except during a pandemic. Our first and second year teachers never knew how to do assemblies or, close small group instruction because they came on board during the pandemic. So we've had to do a lot of grade level planning, professional development sessions with them, to get them to understand, how do you have an awards day? How do we do house celebrations? How do we do the 3 goals? So it's been challenging with children, and I think challenging for some teachers as well.
Well, go back to suspensions. Were you able to reduce out of school suspensions?
We were. We've tried real hard to, and we've actually tried to, we have a reduce in our referrals right now. If you look at the referrals from McLeese, it's kind of hard to tell exactly what you're looking at because we do have the 4 self-contained classrooms, and some of those referrals that are in the system never result in a suspension. That's more of just tracking, because with self-contained special needs children, if we need to have a modified day or work with them, then we just need the data. So it's kind of hard to look in Power School and say exactly how many referrals McLeese had unless you take all of that out. But we have been able to reduce referrals. And I think I've learned to have better conversations with my assistant principal when we talk about, this is a situation that a child has gotten into. Like, one day this week I said, well, let's sit down and talk about it. Does this have to be an out of school suspension, or is this something that we could have in school and have someone, an interventionist come and work with the child? That way they're not missing their resource time. They're not missing, we'll let them go to related arts if that's something they need to do. So I feel like I don't have the, exact numbers, but I've seen a decline in referrals, and I've seen better communication with teachers and administrators on coming up with other ideas to do instead of a suspension.
So it sounds like on reducing suspensions, you hit it from 2 angles. One being, let's try not to make this a suspension offense from the adult or disciplinarian side, and to be creative with the consequences and the outcome of the action or the event. And then the other one being you guys at the administrative level also had to be creative to come up with other responses, if you will, to the behavior issues.
Correct.
Yeah,
we have common corners in classrooms, so the teachers have little corners that students can actually go to. It's got like little bean bags and pillows, because sometimes they just need a place to go to calm down, and they buddy up with another teacher so that the student can actually go into another teacher's classroom for a few minutes to calm down and to come back over. So just little things that we've tried to be creative about.
Understood. Dr. Hudson, go back to the system level a little bit. What's your reaction to seeing this kind of thing going on at some of your elementary schools?
One of the things, Dr. Addis, that I remind principals that suspension is an adult decision. The students misbehave or they decide to misbehave, but the decision to suspend a child rests with the adult.
Mm-hmm.
And I've shared a lot of information on alternatives to suspension. We do that and go through it annually. Several of the things that Ms. Mills just mentioned, we go through any alternative we can come up with a suspension to keep children in school, because we run a lot of analytics, and we know that there's a direct correlation between student attendance at school and student achievement. And, you know, some kids want to be at home, and we know that you cannot achieve unless you are in school. So we're doing all we can to try to reduce those numbers. One thing I did notice, and maybe it's only me, maybe Dr. Greer noticed it too, but we had more problems when we came back out of COVID with telephones, unless I just had forgotten about it. When we came back this time, it just seems to be a bigger problem with everybody wanting to record what is happening, or a fight or a skirmish or something like that in the building. But from a systems-wide perspective, we do a lot of things with the principals, and I read articles all the time, and I share what I find with principals about student discipline.
You know, back in the old days, suspension was the go-to response to a behavior incident. Right. Did you get any pushback on this more progressive approach?
I don't think so. At least in the principals meeting, they nod their heads in agreement.
Okay. Okay.
You know.
Okay.
You know, sometimes when they get back in the school, Sandy, it's a different story. But we do a lot of analytics, and actually I run the data. So, and I share it individually, so they know that we're looking at it, because we've got some really good tools and people who can run suspension by boy, girl, African-American, Caucasian, Latino. So we look at it in a lot of different ways. Just like in instruction, they're looking at MAP scores. In student services, we're looking at attendance and days of suspension.
Dr. Hudson, I think it was so powerful, it bears repeating. Repeat that phrase you used about suspension being an adult decision.
Yeah, I said, yeah, suspension is a decision that the adults make. The children misbehave, and maybe they do it intentionally, unintentionally, but they're within that control. But the decision to send a child home for 1 day, 3 days, 4 or 5, that is the adult's decision. So that's a lot of power. And we remind our principals not to be expedient, and just to realize you have a lot of power in whether or not you send this kid home, or whether or not you send this kid to ISS, or whether you just send them, bring them in your office and work with them and let them cool down. That's the power. So that is an adult decision. Yes.
Understood. Dr. Hudson, you have, I've known Dr. Hudson for a long time, folks, and Dr. Hudson has a reputation in the upstate of South Carolina, at least, for being an elementary turnaround principal. He was an extremely successful principal with several elementary schools that really needed a turnaround. Dr. Hudson, how did you approach student behavior when you were doing that kind of work?
One of the things I've found to be successful was visibility from the administration. And I still do it, like even at the district office. I visited every class every morning, every day. And there's a principal in the district now, from what I hear from his teachers, he does the same thing. But every day, and you build up visibility, you want your assistants to be visible, you want to have good relationships. With my teachers, it was continuous training. It had to be at the forefront. You can think about Michelin, for example, which is the tire company, can make 5,000 tires based on a formula. Well, we have no formula for student behavior, but we have some things that we know that work, and visibility seems to be one of those. The relationships that you have with students, the training with teachers. One of the things, and I believe some of you probably, I know you have folks from the low country and other places. What I found near the end of my career is that we typically call moms when kids are misbehaving. I told my teachers, try to call the dads first. And I noticed it made a difference. And I say, especially if we're dealing with an African-American male student, I want you to call dad first before you call mom. And it was amazing the difference it started making. So I even thought about starting to put dads first in power school, because if you go in power school, for some reason, mom's names are first, but trying to find dads. But so that's one of the things we started doing, or bringing dads in for a meeting, because I think we'd relinquished too much control at the elementary level, or maybe at the school level period, to the moms, and I just wanted to bring them back into the fold. Partner teaching was also good when we had substitutes, for example. We always met the substitute at the door. We had planning together. So I would say, I know that Sandy is going to give you trouble, Thomas is going to give you trouble, and Jerome is going to give you trouble. So I'm going to go ahead and pull those 3 students out and put them in their team teachers class for the day, so that you'd be willing to come back and substitute for me again, ma'am. So you make it as easy. Then I'd say, see this button here? If you have any trouble, you hit it. And then I would go back and check a couple times during the day. And that was good, because the subs would go out and tell people, when you go over to that school, they're going to take care of you. So those are some of the things. Always cover the hot spots.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's great advice, Dr. Hudson. Greatly appreciated. Janet, if you had to give some advice on trying to improve the behavior to other elementary principals, particularly, and elementary educators or educators at any level, what advice would you give them?
I would tell them to remember the positives. Sometimes it's easy to look at the negatives and look at the behaviors, but think about the positive things you have in your building, the things you can offer. I would say make sure you set goals. Like Dr. Hudson said, you have to be visible. You have to have relationships with those teachers and with those children, and set goals. Set a behavior goal for the whole school. Set a behavior goal for individual grade levels. Set a goal for the culture of your school. You know, to have little service learning projects. But remember your goals and work toward goals together, and to stay positive, and remember that, you know, sometimes we're all that the children have. They're with us a lot longer than they are with their parents. And we want to make sure that the relationships they establish at school are the ones that are going to carry them through to their other years in middle and high schools.
That's great advice. Jerome, Janet, you've shared some great ideas and experiences with us, and a whole lot of advice and solutions. We've been about 25 minutes into this conversation. Let's take about 5 to 10 minutes, and let's give you a chance as participants to pose some questions. Remember to unmute your mic when you pose a question. So let's just take some questions for Janet and Jerome. Who would like to ask a question?
Dr. Addis, I would like to share something that Dr. Hudson mentioned. Dr. Hudson, you were talking about the increased use of phones in schools and how that impacted behavior. Did you find that students were engaging a lot in social media, and that those conversations were leading to more conflicts in the building?
That's pretty much where it was happening. Things were being posted on social media, comments were being made on social media, and it seemed to explode. So that was definitely a challenge. We talked about it with the superintendent. What he wants us to do is make sure we enforce the rules on the books about the phones. So, but yeah, that was a major difference, and maybe I'd forgotten, but it seemed that when they came back, it was like they were on just 2.0 or something like that, the phones. But it creates a lot of problems in school with kids knowing something's going to happen and waiting so that they can post it.
Wow. I think the major difference that we saw was the fact that while they were out, they formed a lot of social groups, and they continued those social groups. So they would engage in these group chats in the evenings, and then we'd see things that spill over to the next day. So was that your experience too?
That's pretty much our experience. They're different groups, and it is amazing. I talk with parents who come in from one school or another school, and it is amazing how they're able to communicate with one another. Because I'll say, well, can't you turn it off? And they'll say, well, they'll have another way to get to me. So it creates a lot of havoc, but we're dealing with it.
Well, that's interesting, and you know what that probably says too is that the students were deprived of social contact at the school in person, so they found a way to recreate that void. So that's fascinating. Janet, I have a question for you. You mentioned earlier that you had involved a church or some of the faith community. That's an issue that, you know, particularly folks out in the rural areas, that's maybe a resource. Tell us about that.
It is an excellent resource. We had a church that's actually right behind McLeese, and they are coming in to start a tutoring session, and then they wanted to know, what can we do? What, do you want us to bring food to the faculty? Do you want us to anything? And I said, well, why don't you come and work with some of the children and form some relationships with the children? We can handle the food and everything else for the faculty, but we would like you to come in and work with children. So we call it our proactive club. And because we don't want children to feel like it's a punishment in any way, it's to help them. And the parents are very appreciative of that. So we'll have, in this particular church that I'm working with right now, they have some college students that attend church there. So we're working through some of the local colleges as well, to make sure they get all their, the SLED checks, things like that, and background checks finished up and completed. And then we're going to start with them hopefully next week, and have just to be a little after school club for the students. We have the Good News Club, which is another church actually nearby that comes in on Monday afternoon, and they have a group that they meet with. They've got about 50 children in that. Not so much as tutoring, but more working on social parts of it. This particular church that's coming in for the Proactive Club will do a lot of academics. So we're trying to get the churches involved with the academic side and also with the social side. So I'm very fortunate that I have, 2 to 3 churches right in the close, proximity of the school that want to come and help.
That's an interesting thing. And we're here in South Carolina at the National Dropout Prevention Center. We've done work around the country, and we've said to people in other places, giving South Carolina examples, have you thought about your faith community? And they start holding up signs and saying, no, we can't do that. And we don't, but folks, we're in South Carolina, and I think in most communities, done appropriately, I think you can use that resource, and so don't ignore it. That's one that we can use.
I will say, Dr. Addis, that everybody needs to be accountable in the building for student behavior and student success. Mm-hmm. And everybody in the building was divided into different groups, and you had to really study and look at discipline data, academics, to be successful. And I would run it, for example, 3rd grade, I might say we had 75 referrals. You need to see how many of them you wrote. And well, if a teacher was out of line, immediately they can tell. Mm-hmm. And we do the same thing at the district level. We run it by the entire district and say, this is how many days we had of students out, and go back to your school and see how many of those days were yours. Mm-hmm. And every time you get 180 days, that's 1 school year. Mm-hmm. And so the accountability is certainly important. So, the more people who take responsibility at McLeese, where Ms. Mills is, or at any other school, the better you're going to be district-wide.
Those of us that have been principals, we all can remember, when it came to discipline referrals, there were some teachers that were frequent flyers, and there were other teachers that had the same students some other part of the day and never had a referral, and their discipline and their student behavior seemed to be much better. So then the question becomes, what's the difference, and what are they doing different, and how do you spread that? So I commend you guys in Anderson 5. I'm sitting here in Anderson 5 right now doing this webinar, and I'm proud of you. It's a great thing to have you guys serving our kids.